Hey, Chris. Well, thank you for joining us on the Leading Life podcast, man. Reconnected over LinkedIn, I believe, man. And you kind of shared a little bit of your story, and it was intriguing, especially because it kind of personally goes with the life that I live right now with my son or with my stepson, right? But I wanted to get you on here just so you can share your story, provide your perspective to others, right? And kind of just hopefully help somebody that's maybe going through situations that you've gone through before, right? So, but in tradition with Leading Life, right? If you're a busy professional out there, you only got a little bit of time. We like to get this out of the way so you can get something beneficial and then move on and maybe come back, watch the remainder of the video. So we'll start off with Chris. What is the number one thing that you teach people?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks so much for having me. Delighted to be here. The number one thing I teach people is really quickly how their brain works. It's so funny. We don't spend any energy or time. We don't really teach it in school, but we have this thing in our heads, and we think we know how it works, and we think we know how people work. But there's some really simple things here, really quickly. In neuroscience, 50 years of neuroscience have backed this. So when people are struggling, or someone has a behavior you don't like, your kid or a coworker or something else, they actually don't want to be there, and they would actually rather be functioning well. They really would. Now there's all this stuff that comes up like I can control them, and well, what's happening is there's a stressor that's coming into them that they yet don't know how to handle. They don't have the skills for. They weren't born with it. They're just not able to, right? It's like asking someone in a wheelchair to walk. It would be rude, right, and crude and mean to do that. Someone that's struggling with something, they can't get through it right away. Now, there's ways you can build that skill up. There's ways you can approach someone in a brain-based way. But your number one thing to do when someone is struggling, and it's counterintuitive, is be empathetic and validate. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to like them. You don't have to like what they're doing. But if you just hear them out and you say, yeah, that sounds like that would be tough for you, right? You don't have to agree with it.
Yeah.
That's gonna do wonders. One, for them to be able to regulate and get out of fight, flight, freeze and that upset. And two, to feel heard, because you can feel really alone when you're struggling with stuff like the world's against you, right? Also, now you're connected to a human. And over time, that person will literally build problem solving. They'll build this results-based approach and be able not to struggle with those same things again. It's totally counterintuitive. You know, we grew up with just get over it and just make it happen. And this kind of male mentality that I grew up with. I think most people my age, male and female, grew up with. But the brain science tells us like just a tiny dose of empathy, realizing the person doesn't want to be in that struggling spot, coworker, employee, other person, and validating where they're at does like massive wonders for their health and your health as well.
Yeah. No, and I can relate going into the military. So I went into the military in 2006, and I mean the whole suck it up mentality was just, I mean, it was there. And I believe we were at a time of war then.
Right.
So there was a reasoning for it, right? I see the purpose to it.
Right.
You have to have that just kind of grit, tough mentality, right? Especially going through those times. But I believe, and I'm speaking for me, and I'm sure there's other veterans that can relate as well, is we came back with that same mentality, man, going into the workplace, trying to deal with our family. So, you know, I've had many instances where when I originally got back, that my son, and at that point he was like 9-10 years old, dealing with some stuff, right? And it's tough and everything. And I'm thinking in my head, oh, I've been to war, man. You know, like, fuck it up. That's not even bad. And to your point, I wasn't coming from a place of empathy. I wasn't coming from a place of trying to understand him and what his struggles were at the time, right? And I was just kind of coming down on him with it, and which didn't help the situation at all.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you say that, because I work in like cognitive behavioral therapies with my clients and stuff. And one thing I tell them is just kind of the one thing that we focus on immediately is just recognition of event to emotion, right? And that's a really big thing. It took me a while to kind of, I wouldn't even say master it, to just practice it, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think we can fully master our emotions in a sense of you're never going to get bogged down by them, right?
Right.
Emotions can spurt up real quick, right? And I love that you mentioned it's just that little tiny bit that
Yeah.
you do it, and it'll just kind of propel you to the next one, and you kind of build a habit out of it. And that's one thing I try pushing to my clients so much is like, think of those times, and we do a lot of reflection periods where we go back and we think of the times that you went just straight from event to emotion, event to emotion, event to emotion, and what was the result. And then I challenge them to go event, thought, emotion, right? If you can regulate, not even regulate, but if you can alter your thought of this happened, oh my gosh, my day is ruined, blah 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 blah,
Right.
and then you go to something like, okay, this happened, I was about to go there, but instead I'm going to, okay, this is an opportunity to show my resilience, to be, this type of person and stuff like that. And then you go to the result, kind of changes your mentality a little bit,
No, it
And
totally does. And it's really interesting. We have a survival instinct in our brain called the RAS, reticular activating system. And I joke that it keeps playing our greatest hits. So about 40,000 times a day, it's sending messages to you. And if you're locked in a life sucks, work sucks, my kid sucks, it's going to repeat that. And you're going to start finding evidence for that thing to be true. Right. And it's a little bit of it is just putting some different thoughts in your head. Like you said, just put in, something positive or open to the possibility of something being good. And then your brain repeats it and you start finding it. I mean, we have pretty simple programming, as sophisticated as we think we are.
Yeah. And it's not, it's funny that you say that, because it's not, I have found a lot of times, like working with clients, it's always the simplest things, right? And I feel a lot of it. And for my program that I go through with people, I go through an 8-week leadership development program, and week 1 is perspective. Week 1 is all focused on perspective, because to you, your biggest problems are yours. To you, it's the end of the world with all your problems. They're going out of hand. They're, little things like that, right? And it's what was it? I'm trying to remember this. It's one of my favorite quotes. And I always switch it around. That's what I was trying to remember it. But it's from Helen Keller. It says, I was envious of a man's shoes until I met a man with no feet.
Wow.
Right. And that's truly how we are. Like, to me, my problems are bigger than yours, Chris.
Right.
And
because they're here. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And we don't have that. And this is where I challenge a lot of people, like, go out and experiment, man. Go into experiences. The best thing I ever did was join the military, because it allowed me to travel and see other people's cultures, see the way other people live, like little things like that. I think that's what I think that's what provided me that perspective when I first came back. And I was really hard on my son, because I remember looking the first time when I saw a bunch of kids, and I'm talking like 6-7 year olds that were pretty much holding on to the back of like semi trucks. And they're on the highway, man. Like, Chris, they're like going 50, 55 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, right? And these guys are just holding on for dear life, right?
Wow.
And I asked one of the Afghan police that we were working with, and I was like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, why are they up there? And he's like, dude, that's how they get to school.
Wow.
He's like, because their school is like 15 miles away.
Right. And they're excited to get to school, right? There's like education is a thing that they want to go to, instead of, oh crap, I have to go to school. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, I'm over here and I'm like, and I'm sure a lot of veterans have gone through this part, right? Especially from getting back and seeing that.
Yeah.
And then you get back, and then your kid doesn't want to wake up and go to school, where he's driven, where he eats a good breakfast, where he can take a shower before, it just gives you that perspective. And it's hard. It was really hard for me to kind of center myself when I was talking to my son when I originally got back. It was a lot of emotion that was coming out of me. And finally, after a while, I was able to kind of regulate it a little bit. And instead of telling him, I started telling him stories of things that I would see over there. And that's what would help him gain the perspective that I was trying to instill in him. And, but yeah, I completely feel like just experiences, man, and talking to people, like building relationships with people, hearing their stories. This is a whole, like I said, this is a whole reason why I started this whole podcast, was just to hear different leader stories.
Really important. Yep.
Yeah. And speaking of stories, Chris, I would love to hear yours, man. So how did you get here?
Yeah, boy, that's a long one. I'll shorten it up and make it more interesting. But I came from a family of, we were taught to serve people. I was just brought up with that, so I'm incredibly thankful that that's how I was brought up. And give you an example, my mom, when she retired at 60, decided to go back to school, got a degree in divinity, and wanted to be a hospice chaplain.
Wow.
She did that till she was 82. And it's just, I don't say that to brag. It's just like, that's how I'm wired, right? And that's how my family is wired, is to serve people. And, and that doesn't mean that it has to be all not-for-profit stuff, right? It can be, you can do that in a profitable way and a sustainable way, and also, give back to community. So I grew up with that. I'm incredibly thankful for that. I also grew up being a person that was born with autism that wasn't diagnosed till later in life. So most of my life I've been categorized as a hothead or hyper, or all the stuff we used to call kids when we were kids that struggled, right? It just wasn't understood. And I didn't discover it until I have a son who's on the autism spectrum. And going through all this work and understanding how his brain works and how it's very different than how we perceive things, I'm like, oh, and I was diagnosed as well. So that certainly affected my relationships and everything else. One of the things I would say for me, and autism is a spectrum, every autistic person is a little bit different. I have about 8 trains going at once, and my poor wife sometimes says, "Hey, which train are you on right now?" So it's normal for me to have 6, 7, 8 ideas going.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't get that everyone doesn't work that way. So
Yeah.
right?
It's hard.
Yeah. And it's really hard being on the other side. The other is frustration tolerance. So when stuff comes up, it's really easy for me to go to like the highest level of DEFCON and fight, flight, freeze, and the world's ending, even though, there's no bear in the room. I'm not about to be attacked. I'm not at war, but my brain chemistry is bloop, right. The adrenaline's going, the cortisol's going. And even though the rest of the world's not experiencing it, for someone with autism, your brain chemistry is doing that to you. Right. And you can't just get over it because your brain's like, it has you in fight, flight, freeze. You're locked in, even though the situation doesn't warrant that. Your brain, for whatever reason, basically has a misfire and it's putting you in that spot. So I learned a lot with that. I learned a lot with my son, and then educating our school systems on how to serve these kiddos. Cause I think it's like 1 in 59 boys right now has autism.
Wow.
And the schools, they try their best, but they're not set up for this, right? And the traditional parenting, command control, do this or else, which is what most of us grew up with, kind of managing by fear, which has a place, certainly in wartime, certainly in, really scary situations. You got to do that because it's life or death, but most of life is not life or death. And that's got to be hard for veterans coming back from wartime, and you're not in that spot anymore. And there's no like services that are really useful, right? And the get over it doesn't work, by the way, because you carry all that crap and then it blows up later, right? So
yeah, definitely.
So these kids with autism actually have a lot to do, similarities, I think, with PTSD. That's my personal belief. There's no like science there, but they're holding on to what for them are like big stressors, right? Because they're told to just not get over it, and then it blows up, right? And it's different. You could argue that the trauma is not the same, and that's fine. But for a kiddo with autism, their brain is literally putting that high level trauma for a small event, like literally like going into a crowded coffee shop. My son has an auditory processing disorder with his autism. So he'll hear the coffee machine and the music and the people talking, and like it all comes in at once where, you are filter.
Yeah, you know what, Chris? And so my stepson is autistic as well, and
cool.
he has the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why we connected initially, because of talking about this. And it's interesting to me, even sometimes like when the TV is too loud, like he'll just like, and it's almost for him, it's definitely flight. Like he does not want to be around heavy, high pitched noise kind of thing. Even sometimes when the dogs bark, right? And lately, one thing that we've noticed, and I would love to get your experience on this, is one thing that we've noticed is for him, it has to be repetition, right? So like simple things like brushing your teeth in the morning, washing your face, like little things like now that he's getting older, right? Putting on deodorant, like little things like that. But it has to be systemized. Like it has to be a process, right? If you mess up that process, it throws him all off.
Totally.
Right? Do you see the same?
Yeah, that's a pretty common one. I have it too. It's there's a certain comfort and regulation with that for someone that struggles with autism, and it literally calms them down. And so if things are there, it's like predictable, and I don't need to freak out. And it doesn't make like total logical sense for someone that doesn't have autism, but to them, that's like, what do I do? Because they don't yet have the coping skills, right? We can adapt and do lots of stuff. And they're what's really hard is for people that are super adaptable to get folks that aren't, right? And think they're flawed or something.
Yeah, I would say that was one of my, that was truly one of mine, because I mean, I've learned over the years, and especially having leadership roles and stuff like through the military, outside of the military, right? I'm a naturally very curious person. Awesome. So for me, it's just naturally being curious about people and asking them like, hey, what do you do? Right. I remember I talked to one of the guys that I talked to where I was working at before. Like, this guy was building his own engines, like performance engines. And I'm like, cool. You look at him and you're like, okay, he's just a regular dude. Right. And like, no, man, this guy like legit would have like people coming to him to modify their engines for racing.
Awesome.
And I'm thinking like, what are you doing here?
Right.
I was like, why aren't you doing that? He's like, oh man, it's not as sustainable as you think, right? Not a lot of people are building race engines, So I was like, but for me, that was hard in a sense of coming back and understanding like, well, why doesn't he learn this, right? Why is my son not adapting to this? Like, this is the 15th time we've done this kind of thing, right?
Right.
And then there's other things that he's just great at, right? He's very. I'm not really sure on like the official like definition of it, but he's very in keen with like people's emotions. Like if you're sad, he knows you're sad.
Yeah.
He like feels that in people. Even when we can be in Walmart walking around and he like looks at like a little girl or a lady or something like that, and like he's like, Mom, why is she sad? Like little things like that. And it amazes me sometimes, man, how he picks up on like little things like that.
Yeah, I understand just a little bit of it, so I'll probably get this wrong. If there's a doctor out there listening, you can correct me. But my understanding is certain parts of the brain like sort of overdevelop. So it's common for the limbic system, where emotions live, to kind of overdevelop there, which totally fits what you're saying, is that in tune with emotions or just having really strong emotional responses, right, to events where your body's like, but yeah, it's pretty common. Also, when people with autism can go to kind of a fantasy space, and it's hard to, fantasy and reality are kind of blended for them because of the way the brain has worked, and that can be really challenging. Like my son, when he was younger, really thought Thor was in the room, and in his brain, Thor was in the room. For me, Thor's not in the room. You're lying, right? And
yeah.
And when I finally got to, I get it. That makes sense. That must be scary. What's Thor doing? Instead of getting, upset and command control with him in that sort of way. I mean, just all kinds of things open up. And all this learning that I used, I tweaked and adopted, because not everyone's autistic, but everyone's brain works the same way. And when people are struggling, it's almost the same pattern as autism. They have something that's coming up. They don't know how to deal with it. And you need to build the skill up so they can deal with it, which is what leaders should really do, right? Is how do we build people up and set them up for a win and get the heck out of their way? And so that's what I've been trying to do in the corporate world, is apply that same brain science, albeit different. Because everyone, someone misses something, someone didn't do something the way you wanted, didn't treat a customer right, the team's not maybe operating at the level you think they could. If I get all pissed at him and I'll command control and do this or else, maybe that works once, but dude, you only get to do that once or twice a year. Right? Yeah. And people are they have options, and they're just not going to respond in the way you want, versus can I build them up, right? And can I make them better than me? And can I really set them up for a win? Not just like this, package emotional intelligence or whatever the buzzword is, and you have a little session and but really connect one-on-one with your team. And like, understand where they struggle and figure out a path to build them up.
Yeah.
I mean, they will stay with you forever. One, because you actually really care about them, and two, they're going to surpass what ideas you even had, right? So it doesn't have to be all your ideas as a leader. Like if I can create a network of really brilliant people underneath me,
Yeah.
it's a lot more fun to lead from that.
Yeah.
It's
No,
more work,
I
but it's way
completely
more
agree.
fun.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know we spoke a little bit about it before, but I had that experience, especially with with leadership development in the workforce, and
Yeah,
especially during the kickoff of emotional intelligence.
right.
And just hearing, I mean, I remember just going on LinkedIn and everybody was like, "Oh, we're learning emotional intelligence. My company's
Right.
doing emotional intelligence." People or companies having infographics like, "Oh, we practice emotional intelligence. 80% of our team is trained on emotional
Right.
intelligence." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's great." And then me going to work and actually hearing from a coworker saying that he's having trouble controlling his anger at home towards his kids and his wife.
Right.
And that's what, and this leads me to one of my professional goals for my company is just pretty much redefining what leadership development means, right?
Awesome.
I think we got, I feel like we got way too far into, I guess, corporate America, where it's almost a catchword,
Right.
and we kind of lost the essence of leadership development. Really should help you throughout your career, your life, how to manage your family, how to manage your work life balance, like a lot of things, right? I one
Yeah.
thing that one thing that that I harp so much on, especially for the clients that work with me, is the motto of my company is persistence, not perfection.
Mm.
I feel that fear, that attitude towards we got to get it right, especially now with so much social media, and you see, I mean, everybody shares their successes, right?
Right.
Nobody's out there sharing like, man, hey, guess what? I had 15 calls today for sales, and I made zero, but this is
Right.
what I learned, right? And I think we need more of that. We need to see more people like, hey, it's okay if you're failing, right? I think
Totally.
I shared with you before we jumped on the call is I started my company like 2 years ago, right, as a side hustle, and I recently left my job. So now I'm like 1 month in. I'm like 30 days in, right? And
Right.
I was kind of going through that, Chris, where a couple of days ago, I'm like, man, is this really gonna work? Oh my God,
Right.
how am I gonna get more clients? Oh my God, how am I gonna do this? And like,
Right.
I mean, my mind was just going, man. It was
Yeah.
going, and I had to stop myself and I had to think, right? What I said before, right? Okay, this is the event, right? I'm doubting myself, right? I'm doubting my abilities. I'm doubting my program. I'm doubting my intention, my goals, everything like
Right.
that. And it was going to the emotion of like, should I quit? Should I, like, that fear was setting in. Like, to me, the easier thing would be, hey, just go get a job again. Just go
Sure.
find a job, right? Leave this alone, go find a job. But then my thought, and this is where I harp so much on the clients, it was the event happened, and then I guess, revisited the event, and then I input my thought. So my thought
Mm.
being, well, if you go back to work, are you truly going to be fulfilled?
Right.
Right? Because that's why I left my job before. I wasn't fulfilled. I felt like I had a bigger calling, and this is my bigger calling. So, I got to keep following it, where the emotion went to, okay. And then it kind of came back to me of like, well, John, dude, you've only been doing this 30 days. Dude. Like,
Right.
calm
No, that's
down. Like,
and
yeah,
people do that from job to job, right? I mean, I've done that in my past where
yeah,
I hate this job, I'm just going to go somewhere else. Well, all the crap follows you, right? It doesn't like
mhm,
magically not come along. Now, yeah, there's some things unique to workplaces, and yes, there's extremes of abusive places, but in general, most places aren't that far different, right? And if I'm just like, oh, I'll just go to a different employer and everything will be better. Well, yeah, maybe for 30, 90 days, but then all those patterns, if I haven't changed, are going to follow me.
yes.
And it's so hard to admit that we're part of it, right? It's always someone
Oh,
else's
yeah,
problem.
yeah. No, and I've had those experiences. I mean, not getting promoted and like little
Right.
things like that. I mean, I was like, oh, it's their fault and everything. And I shared this recently on LinkedIn, and I feel like, I don't want to say people don't understand it, but I feel you get to a point where you got to come to the understanding that the company is not responsible for your development.
Right.
right? They're there to show you how to do the job. And that's as far as they're going to develop you is, hey, can you do the job successfully? Can you do it effectively and efficiently? Cool. Thank you.
Right.
That's it. Like, right. And I feel like this is where a lot of people in the end of their career, right? And this is where you see CEOs that leave. They're like, oh, what's Chris, the CEO of Google, doing now? Oh, well, he's friggin' running a tackle and bait shop in Florida.
Right.
Like, it was his passion. His passion has been fishing for the past 15 years.
Happier than he's ever been, probably.
Yeah. And I feel somewhere along the lines, like we're going like this, and our passions and our purpose and everything go this way, and we keep going up. Right. And that's where I try working with my clients on, right? It's like I said, we start week 1 with perspective, and then after that, we go into strengths, opportunities, attitude, and resilience.
Nice.
Right. And throughout my journey, I have figured and I have learned that those were always at play for me.
100%.
Right? Throughout any leadership journey, and any leadership position I had, right? It was always there, especially attitude was real big, big for me. I mean, I remember a time where I thought my strength as a leader was competitiveness. Right. And I would lead like that. Right. And at that moment in time, I was really arrogant. Arrogant. I was
done that.
I was a guy like I was a go-getter, man. I remember a old leader of mine told me, he's like, man, John, he's like, you would run through a wall, dude. And I was like, yeah, I took that as a compliment. I was like, yeah,
right.
Like, and now after reflecting, after understanding and looking at the roles that I've had, the positions I've had, the people that I've helped and stuff like that. And especially looking, I always tell people, if you want to find your strength, look at the areas of your life that you win in the most, right? For me, what I found was when I looked at those areas, I was like, well, what made me take that position? What made me volunteer for that project? What made me talk to that person to help them? And overall, it was just my curiosity. I'm just a naturally curious person. And that's what really led me to understanding my strength, right? And I would love to hear if you have an example. How would that, because I know you said like sometimes you got like 7 different trains going on at one time, right? How does that affect you in a sense of like when you're leading and if you're trying to lead with your strength, right? Like in your case.
That's a great question. For a long time, I tried to shut that down, like that's bad and wrong. And then like, wait a second, this is how I'm wired. So recently, in the last 3 years, I've just sort of celebrated, this is how I function. And when I connect with people that work for me and my teams, I let them know, like, this is how I'm wired. And I get that it's weird. And so there's like a vulnerability there, kind of to your point about like LinkedIn or Facebook, like sharing where you're not strong. I mean, people can connect with you if you admit like, I'm struggling here. Or I'm a little weird here. Like, oh, I can relate to that person because I'm weird too, versus, I've got it all together. So there's that. There's it's given me opportunity to teach some stuff that I know about brain science, which happens to be useful to people, which is, well, that's cool, right? And they learn new stuff. So I think it's being vulnerable, not in the place like I'm a weakling, but vulnerable like this is who I am, like this is what I'm about, and this is how I'm wired. So I think it helps a lot, and it allows others to say, oh, well, this is what I'm about, or think about who they are and what they're about. And then we can have a real conversation. It's not like, did you hit the daily number and you hit this report and we hit our quarterly this or that, or the output's this, or I'm frustrated at this vendor, but like something will come up of some sort of pattern that underlies maybe performance. That wouldn't come up otherwise, right? It just doesn't come up because they don't feel safe. So I think, for me, with 8 things going at once, there's that. It's being aware of it and being aware that not everyone is crazy like me that way. They have different crazy. Right.
We all got some kind of crazy in us.
Absolutely. Right. And then also having fun with it. Like, again, for me, and I don't say this like to brag or anything, but like, I enjoy writing books. I enjoy doing this. I enjoy doing this. And for whatever reason, I can do all 3 reasonably well. And not everyone can, and I'm not judging them. I don't think I'm better or worse than them, but that's just how I am, and I'm happy doing 2 or 3 things at once, right? And other people are like, I just need to do one thing. I'm like, that's awesome, right? It's not a judgy thing. It's being aware of your strengths, being aware of who you are. if you're someone that really is diligent and needs everything in order and one thing at a time, there's nothing wrong with that. You just own it and you let people know you're freaked out when you're asked to do too many things at once. You know, if you're like me, I'm freaked out if I'm asked to like focus and just do this one thing and sit still. I mean, that would I'll go berserk.
Yeah. And
and both are fine. I mean, both exist, both are useful, both are good. So I think just being honest with where you're at, sharing that, you know, being brave enough to share.
Yes.
I think people mistake as a leader that you have to be perfect and have it all together. And while you need to be composed, you know, dude, sharing where you struggle appropriately can be really strong. Like, oh, it's okay for me to struggle with something and this leader gets me. You know, that worker leader relationship now changed where you're more like a coach, right?
Yes.
Which is way more fun than
Yes.
being a micromanager. That sucks, right? Making sure people do everything the right way. That's exhausting.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a big I feel like that's a big gap in the workplace right now. It's managers being taught to, I mean, you manage, yes, but I think we don't have that coaching like
Right.
mentality anymore in the
Right.
environment, right? A manager is there to manage, and I was big into, so I've done a lot of like distribution, logistics, transportation. That was my work for the military until recently, right? And one thing that I saw a lot of was when Lean Six Sigma came, right? Everybody was trying to get in on it. Hey, let's impose Lean Six Sigma. Let's do 5S. Let's do 8S. Like it went all the way up to like 25,000 S's, right? And it was interesting because I saw, and this was a couple weeks back. I saw somebody post something on LinkedIn. They're like, how do you think it implements, right? How can you successfully implement Lean Six Sigma into an organization, right? And after working a couple projects and stuff and for different companies and talking to different leaders and seeing different results, right? Not every project worked out.
Right.
One thing that I came to understand is that any type of program that you implement in a workplace has to be supported by the top down,
right,
and has to be understood by the bottom up, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of times I would see that the bottom level leadership is trying to implement something, but the top's not supporting them. So they're just like, whatever, right? Eventually it dies down. And then I've seen other ones where the top is trying to push this agenda of like, hey, we're going to do 5S, we're going to do Lean Six Sigma. But then I would walk and I would ask, and I tell people all the time, I was like, go ask the front associate, the person that works in the front of the line, what they know about Lean Six Sigma, what the company stance is on Lean Six Sigma or 5S or whatever it is. Even little simple things I would ask sometimes of like, when people were trying to 5S, right, they would put the tape around the garbage can, right? This is where the garbage can goes, right? Everything in its place. And I would just ask an associate, like, hey, what's that tape for? What goes there? Oh, I don't know. Somebody came by like 3 days ago and just put some tape on the ground.
Right.
I'm like, okay, so you weren't explained the methodology behind all this, behind what's going on in this company. And that's why it's not going to stick. Huh?
Right.
And that's where I try going back to, just like you said, coaching, right? It's that manager, get with your supervisors, get with your leaders, coach them, make them understand that. Supervisors, get with your team leads, coach them, make them understand what's going on. And then the team leads pass it on down. And if you build that type of community in there, like, just like you said, like you'll have them associates forever, man. I truly believe that.
Or they're promoted past you, which is also a success factor, right? Sometimes we get locked into this thing, and I'm like, some of my biggest successes in my mind are people that either were promoted up in my org or in a right way left to a cool opportunity somewhere else. So I'm like, you know, it hurts in the moment, but you've kind of done your job as a coach if that happened.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of have to step back because it's hard and you got to backfill the person and there might be noise. Chris might be a bad leader and this is why the person left. I'm like, okay, whatever. But that's, I think really the job as a leader is you set people up for a win and they may leave your org eventually. And you got to be okay with that, or they may be your boss. And that's kind of the biggest example of you've really done your job as a leader.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Definitely. And I love that you bring that up. I mean, we should be inspiring people, really. I mean, I focus my program on building influential leaders. And by that, I mean, you're influential to the point where you're, it may sound cliche, but you're passing a little bit of that flame to that next person, right?
Totally.
A little bit, almost like a little bit of yourself to that next person. And you're like, here, take what I've taught you and carry it on and teach the next. And then they teach the next, and so on and so on. And I feel like that's how you build a community of influential leaders. Like, with that mentality in mind. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love what you're doing, Chris, too, in a sense of like teaching people almost how to manage, like almost how to manage the chaos, right? Like,
yeah,
understanding what that other person brings, right? It's interesting how you said, right, this is how I work, right? So for my wife's she's a pastry chef, right? She has her own company and everything too, and it's interesting to me sometimes because I'll see her working and I'm like, oh, man, I'm gonna kill this, I'm gonna murder this. What is it called? But man, if anybody out there knows what the word is, tell me. But I think it's like mise en place or mise en place or something like that.
Marzipan.
It's something like it. It's to say everything in its place and a place for everything, almost like a 5S system. But it was what she was taught in culinary school. It's like before you start baking, you have all the ingredients lined up.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So there's a word for it. So if anybody out there knows what I'm talking about, my wife's gonna kill me. I'm gonna show her this afterwards. She's gonna be like, "Dang, really? I've told you this word like 20 times." But she has her process where, to me, I'm like, okay, well, get cooking, right? And like I go in there and I'm like, all right, grab egg, yeah, whatever, right? I'm like, oh man, I forgot the bacon. And I'm running around all crazy. And she's like, no, that's why you have everything out here already, ready to go, seasoned, whatever you got to do. And then you start cooking all at once. And babe, I already told you this. Like, and it's interesting because to me, it's like how you said, my brain works a certain way, right? So when I'm in the kitchen, I'm just, and this is probably driven by an emotional hunger, right? Where I'm just like, I just want the food. Let's go, right? But when I'm like project management, John over here, like working with the client and everything, I'm very strategic, right? There's those moments, and it's interesting that your life is just like a mixture of you balancing how you are, what you do, and how you do it, man.
Totally. And you bring a great example. That's what can happen in the workplace, right? If you're super focused and you need to do it this way for you to work, and this other person's a little more adaptive or loose or whatever the right word is, right? There can be some natural conflict there. Neither person's wrong or flawed, right? It's getting past, okay, how do we work together? Because we're going to be working together, and this pisses you off and this pisses you off. So how do we work this out?
Definitely.
And get over it is not a result, not a way to get past that. I mean, it'll work in the moment. And yes, we do need to all get over certain things and not let them bowl us over. I don't mean that, but having a real conversation about like where you feel safe. I'm like, dude, it bothers the F out of me when you line everything up. And the converse is like, yeah, it freaks me out when you're all over the map. Awesome. Yeah. We respect each other. How can we like figure this out? That's a pretty killer conversation, and probably the result's way better than letting it fester or saying get over it, or other things most people do, or say you have emotional intelligence and you really don't.
Right? Yeah, exactly, man. And that's one thing that I believe. Me personally is like, that's one thing I believe that every leader should really practice is like humility, right? And being able, and I think you kind of harped on this a little bit earlier. Are you going to be mad that your associate got promoted over you? Right? If that happens, right? Okay. I mean, I've had, and this was interesting because when I left the military, I left on active duty military in 2015, right? And it surprised some of my prior leadership. They were like, man, John, I thought you were going to go all the way, man. 20 years, you're going to be the next sergeant major of the Army, right? I was very, like I said, I was very driven at that time. And I just had a shift in perspective, man. I wanted to spend more time with my son, right? My son was growing up. I was missing a lot of his life. And it was just at that moment, I had an opportunity, whether go to another unit and potentially deploy again, or get out and almost start all over, man. And I chose to get out, man. Me and my son moved into a 1-bedroom apartment. I went to school. I was going to school while I was working part-time job and just trying to make it then, and and one thing that I saw was, and it kind of hit, man, Chris. It really hit because like maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years later, I started seeing all my prior soldiers all promoted over the rank that I was currently at in the
That's
reserves.
tough.
I'm still in the reserves, right? And I remember even catching up with them on Facebook. They're like, "Hey, how you doing, Sergeant? Like, hey, how you doing? How's everything going? Everything? Hey, where are you at the reserves and everything?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm a staff sergeant in the reserves." They're like, "Staff sergeant?" They're like, "But you were a staff sergeant like 5 years ago." I was like, "Yeah,
Right.
man, it's a little different in the reserves, but I'm not really focusing so much on the career side of it, and like so it was that hard truth that I had to kind of sit with it for a while.
Yeah.
I had to sit with it and just kind of tell myself like, "Nah, look, it's good. They got promoted. They're doing their thing, right?" And this is where I stress so much to people is identify your level of success, because
Mm.
that could have really broke me. That could have really broke me in a sense of like, man, I'm not doing nothing with my life. My soldiers that I was managing are promoted over me and everything. But then I had to tell myself, well, hold on, man, you got this other job and I'm doing this other job right now. I'm starting up departments. I got these certifications for like Six Sigma.
Right.
I got a certification for Scrum. Like I'm doing all these other projects on the side, working with this Fortune 100 company.
Right.
And like, so you have to really take the time to really define that success for you. Otherwise, things like that might really just get in there and kind of throw a wrench in your engine,
Totally. Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
much more than the title or even salary, but it's their first instinct is to go to a place of like lack or lesser, like and the my suck story can start for most of us, right? And all that stuff.
Oh,
Or I'm better than them. All that stuff comes up, right? And we just kind of have to own that that's there and deal with it. And then you said so well, get back to your like, what's your why? Like, what do you really care about? And like, what's your version of success? Because it won't be the same as anyone else, even though, society will say it's a rank or a dollar, or we're married with 2 kids, or we never had a divorce, whatever those like things are, those norms, like with respect for most of them, like who cares, right? As long as you're serving other people
Yeah.
and you're bettering yourself, you're very likely in a great space and successful, right? But we have all this noise that convinces us of some other story.
Definitely.
I've got friends that are mechanics, and sometimes people would look down on blue collar work, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, he's doing great financially. He's probably making more than you are. He's incredibly happy. He does a much needed service. It doesn't matter that he's not maybe, I'm in high tech. He wasn't in high tech and do this other thing. That's what makes him happy. He's really good at it. And he's making 7 figures too, by the way.
Yep.
But it's so easy to judge or misrepresent. Like, I'm not successful because I'm not that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I've actually had that experience before with a guy that I used to serve in a reserve unit. He was a plumber. He was a journeyman plumber.
Nice.
And man, this guy, he was like, "Yeah, man, I remember it was like tax season and we're doing our taxes. And he's like, "Man, I got robbed on taxes and all this stuff." And I was like, "Oh yeah, man, me too." And he's like, "Dude, he showed us a thing." And I'm like, "Dude, you make 6 figures?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, and I'm looking at myself like, "Dude, oh, okay." Like,
right.
And and it goes back to I was this guy, man. He great job, right? But great family. His thing was he just wanted to be by his family, right? And he's like, John, he's like, I busted my butt to get here, right? Like, dude, he's like, you don't understand. Like, I used to have to get into holes, man. And he was a little guy, so he's like, I would have to get into the smallest little holes, man, and try like maneuvering and doing all this stuff, right? And he's like, now, man, he's like, I've worked on my craft so much over like a 20-something year period, man, that like I'm almost like a consultant, man. He's like, I get called by the city sometimes to come check out pipes because I got to sign off on them and say like, yeah, this passes inspection or not. He's like, dude, right there, $500, man, for going there for like an hour, like to check out and sign off on this stuff and everything. And this is where I kind of tell people, because his thing was just, he's like, I'd rather just do that, man, and then go home to my family, right? And
Right.
one thing that I stress to people, and I tell them, I'm like, don't just sit there and memorize your company's core values. Come up with your own. You should know your own core values before your company's, right?
100%.
Understand why you tick, man. What drives you, right? And I'm like, I can't tell you enough, man, Chris, how many people I have talked to before. I would say about like 60-70% of them that I've talked to before and just having general conversation. And they're like, yeah, I want to advance in my career. I want to do this. I want to do that. And I'm just like, okay, well, what are your core values? What are your top 3 core values that you're leading your life in? And they're like, oh, well, I guess I do this. And I'm like, don't guess, man. I was like, do me a favor. I was like, let's plan another call, man. I was like, I'll give you these tips real quick on how to figure it out real quick, right? I was like, look at your life, really sit down, man. And I was like, even sit. And I tell people sometimes too, I'm like, don't be afraid to sit in your dark place either, man.
Yeah.
Like, look at those dark events that happened in your life, right? Because they motivated you. There was an action that came out of the darkest places of your mind, man, of your timeline, right? Yeah. I was like, sit with those two and sit down and really figure out what was driving you at that time. And I was like, just come up with 3, man. Come up with 3. Let's do it. Let's do a follow-up call in a week from now. And come up with 3 and let's talk about those,
Nice.
And yeah, that's how we get the ball rolling, man. But I was like, I wish I could turn mine. I have my core values, man. They're posted up right on the wall, right next to me.
It's awesome.
I see them every day, man. So it constantly reminds me. But yeah, hey, I know we're almost out of time, boss. There is definitely a question I wanted to ask, man, so you can share it with others. It was, do you recommend a favorite quote, a book, or a podcast? Something that you like and you think others should either learn it or read it or listen to it.
Yeah. There's 2 quotes from Einstein. So I'm breaking the rules with 2, but it's one person. One, okay. Einstein was brilliant in a lot of ways.
I see how your brain's working there, Chris.
Yeah, it does. It does that. The first one I've had for a long time, imagination is more important than knowledge. And that's probably feeds into my whole, neuro thing there, but knowledge doesn't mean knowledge isn't important, but imagination is more important. So that's amazing from, probably one of the biggest brilliant people in our last 100 years. The other thing he said that's even more poignant is great spirits are always violently oppressed by mediocre minds. I'm like, whoa, that one really hit me, both from a, you see people, really good-hearted people get diminished in the world, and that pattern happen. But then inside yourself, right? You've got this great idea and you're excited, and then that BS story in your brain maybe says you can't or you're less or any of that junk, right? Yeah. And it's your own mediocre mind that's preventing you.
That's powerful. Successful. That's very powerful. No, I appreciate you sharing that. That's very powerful. It kind of reminds me of I try asking people sometimes. I'm like, hey, like when I'll see Facebook posts and stuff like that, like, oh, it's Friday and everything. And I'm like, how can you make every day feel like Friday?
Right.
Because I'm like, something's exciting you about a Friday, right?
Right.
I'm like, whether it's, hey, we get off of work early, I get to spend time with my family, my kids, my dogs, I get to go to the beach, right? Or something like that. And I'm like, how do you make every day feel like that?
Especially Sunday night. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, trust. I've had those times, man, where I'm just so defeated on a Sunday that I didn't want to go in on a Monday. And I knew it was, I've learned to, I guess, listen to my feelings a little bit, my emotions, my mind a little bit, where it's like, okay, what am I being told right here? Like something's going on for me feeling like this, right? And there was a time where I was like, I would go to bed Sunday and I was just like, man, I can't sleep. I'm so excited to wake up.
Yeah.
And there was other times where I'm like, and like, I don't want to get up, so I'm like, just listen, man. And that's where, I harp a lot on people, especially through my 8-week program. It's a big 8-week self-awareness program.
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
Really what it is. It's self-awareness. And just like you said, I mean, you understand what's going on with you, but how do we work with other people understanding you, right? And a lot of it, I strongly feel what you said. A lot of it starts with just honesty, man. Honesty, having that conversation.
100%.
Have that conversation, man. Yeah, definitely. So, hey, Chris, let me get to this. How can you help people, or how do you help people, and where can they get a hold of you and talk further?
Yeah, my thing really is helping people stop BS at work. I think we all have it. We all have a BS story. We talk about it at happy hour or whatever else. And sometimes it's on high rotation. I call it our greatest hits. To keep replaying it. And I want folks to be able to stop that and also realize that's just 40% of your life. Like, you're giving away your precious life energy here. So I've got a book out. It's called Boost Your, forgive the French here, Bullshit Resilience at Work. It's 13 brain-based ways, simple practices you can do that really do work. They're evidence-based and will help you get out of that. I also have programs really for corporations. So if you're an HR person or manager, director, VP, I can help your team be more resilient, come up with more ideas, have lower attrition, all of those things. So that's what I do. I love doing it. It's based on me learning the hard way over 30 years. So if I can accelerate that time for others and help them get successful, that's what I'm all about.
Awesome, guys. Well, yeah, definitely go check out thebsbook.com. All right. Get a hold of Chris if you would like to learn a little bit more about how he can help your organization or help you. Right. And appreciate you checking out this episode, guys. And Chris, appreciate you having the time to come on, share a little bit about your story and your perspective, man. It was a great conversation, man.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.